Good morning, children, and welcome back. Today we'll be reading Chapter 9, The Battle of Little Bighorn. So if you would please turn to that chapter or just listen to me read, or do not forget you also have an audio version in the material section of the Google Classroom. Today as we read, we're going to find out why the Battle of Little Bighorn was so important and the shared history of the European settlers and the Native Americans. Do not forget, when you are done, you can head on over to the Google Classroom and work on the assignment that goes with Chapter 9. So here we go. Chapter 9, Battle of the Little Bighorn. In previous chapters, you read about conflict between Native Americans and settlers moving west. This is the story of the Battle of the Little Bighorn. It is an event that stands out in the history of this conflict. Lieutenant Charles Varnum was awake long before reveal that morning. In fact, he had not slept at all the night before, and he was not alone, for there was going to be a battle that day, and everyone knew it. He watched the sunrise and light fog drifting across the wide prairies of southern Montana. This was a pleasant place to be in the summertime, even if you had to wear a heavy wool uniform like Varnum and his fellow cavalrymen. The troops were camped in a little river valley. The day before, Varnum had noticed a silvery rainbow trout in the nearby creek, and perhaps the thought had crossed his mind that it would be nice to spend the day fishing beside the little creek. However, Varnum knew very well that this day would hold no time for leisure or relaxation. They were at war, and the enemy was near. In fact, according to his scouts, the enemy was just on the other side of that river. The war became known as the Black Hills War because much of the fighting was in or around the Black Hills of South Dakota. Later, it was also referred to as the Great Sioux War of 1876. Lieutenant Varnum was in the 7th Cavalry Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer. This was one of many Indian wars and other bloody conflicts between Native Americans and U.S. forces. As chief of scouts, Lieutenant Varnum gathered intelligence or important information about the enemy's location and strength. Varnum had a tough ragtag group of men under his command. The scouts included warriors from the Arikara and Crow tribes. Their people once fought the U.S. soldiers too, but they had surrendered and moved onto the reservations. Their tracking skills and knowledge of other tribes was very useful. The day before, June 25th, Varnum sent his scouts to explore the banks of the Little Bighorn River. They reported findings of a very large Lakota Sioux village. They said there were many warriors in the village, but they did not know how many exactly. They only knew that it was a very big valley with hundreds of teepees. As with his duty, Varnum reported this information to Custer, his commander. Custer wanted to see the village, so Varnum and his scouts took him to the top of the tallest nearby hill. From there, they could see smoke from the campfires, and they could see a few teepees and some horses, but not much else. Custer said he wanted to attack the village, but the Arikara and Crow scouts protested, saying they had never seen such a large village. Nonetheless, Custer saw this as an opportunity to deal a major blow to the enemy and maybe even end the war, so he ordered his men to prepare for an attack. Years earlier, during the Civil War, Custer had gained a reputation for being fearless and aggressive. However, he also had a reputation for being reckless, taking big risks with the lives of his soldiers. 10 years later, Custer was still the same type of soldier. Like everyone else in the 7th Cavalry, Varnum had great respect for Custer and was proud to serve under his command. Still, Varnum could not help feeling that maybe this time Custer was being too reckless. Custer could not see the whole village from the top of that hill because it extended several miles along the river valley. He only saw the very edge of the village. Beyond that, there were at least 10,000 Lakota Sioux camped along the river, including as many as 2,000 warriors. And the Lakota were not alone. Their allies, the Arapaho and Cheyenne, were there as well. In the past, the tribes had often gathered in this valley of the Little Bighorn River because it was good hunting ground and there was plenty of water nearby. In 1876, with war raging all around, they were all gathered in this place. Amongst the thousands gathered together were a famous Lakota holy man named Sitting Bull, along with a great warrior chief named Crazy Horse. Many members of the Lakota tribe had to live on the reservations. They had signed treaties with the federal government. The treaty said it was their land and nobody else's. But settlers moved in anyway, and the reservations kept getting smaller and smaller. At last, the Lakota left the reservations. They packed up their teepees and traveled across the plains into Wyoming and Montana to hunt buffalo and live free. Of course, the U.S. government wanted them to go back to the reservations. They told the Lakota to return by midnight on January 31st, 1876, or there would be war. The Lakota did not return to the reservations, and the Black Hill War started the next day. Sitting Bull was a famous spiritual leader, known among all the Lakota and their allies. He told his people to have courage in their war against the Washoe. This is what the Lakota called the soldiers and the settlers, Wasichu. The true meaning of this word is not certain, though some have concluded that it means person who takes the fat, or someone who is greedy. Anxious and uncertain of their futures, the tribes gathered in this valley in the early summer of 1876 because Sitting Bull was going to perform a sun dance. The sun dance was an ancient sacred ritual. During the Sundance, Sitting Bull prayed for a vision of the future. He asked the spirits what would happen to his people. Sitting Bull predicted that the Lakota would win a great victory in battle. Sitting Bull was not the only important leader in the great village on the Little Bighorn that day. Crazy Horse was there as well. In some ways, Crazy Horse was a little like Custer, bold and reckless. In battle, he rode straight at the enemy, but no arrow or bullet ever found him. All the warriors were happy to follow Crazy Horse wherever he went because he always found victory. After talking with Varnum and his scouts, Custer ordered his troops to prepare to attack the village. Custer planned a surprise attack, but he soon realized this was impossible. After all, the Lakota scouts too, and it's not... Oh, let me back up. After all, the Lakota had scouts too, and it is not easy to hide a cavalry regiment for very long out on the plains. The regiment had 11 companies, each with around 50 to 60 men. Custer divided the regiment into 3 brigades, or groups or companies. He sent 3 companies with Captain Benteen and another 3 companies with Major Reno. Custer kept the largest force of 5 companies, totaling 210 men, under his direct command. At first, Lieutenant Varnum was a little disappointed when he learned that he was going with Reno's force. Varnum wanted to ride with Custer and the main force. Custer did take several of Varnum's scouts because he needed them to guide him to the village. The Arikara and the Crow had long been enemies of Lakota since the days before any Europeans knew about America. Therefore, Varnum's scouts were willing to go and fight with Custer. However, as he was riding out with Reno's troops, Varnum saw his scouts preparing for battle. They were singing their death songs, which meant they did not expect to survive the day. Custer took his brigade to the north along the right bank of the Little Bighorn River, looking for a good place to cross and attack the village. Reno crossed over to the left bank, and his troops moved north on that side of the river. Soon, scouts were reporting that the Lakota knew the soldiers were coming and they were not running away. Custer sent a message to Reno and ordered him to attack the village and force the Lakota to come out and fight. Custer, meanwhile, was a mile or so upriver, and he planned to attack at the same time, creating chaos and confusion in the village. Reno's brigade dismounted from their horses and approached a few teepees on the edge of the village. They moved forward in a line cautiously, with the troops up front and the officers, including Lieutenant Varnum, to the rear. As they approached the village, Varnum saw children running away. Several women mounted horses, and they were the first ones to ride out and shoot at the soldiers. Then the warriors arrived. At first, there were only a few. They hid in the tall grass and fired their guns from a distance. Reno's soldiers and the Lakota shot back and forth for about 20 minutes. One of Reno's men was wounded during this time, but that was all. However, Lieutenant Varnum was a trained and experienced scout, which means he had good eyes and a good sense of what was happening around him. He realized that the Lakota warriors were gathering behind a nearby hill. Varnum sent a scout to see, and sure enough, he reported that there were at least 500 warriors there. Before Varnum could warn Reno, the warriors rode their horses around from behind the hill. The group shook, and the air filled with the war cries as warriors swarmed toward Reno's brigade. Bullets and arrows whizzed all around, and then the soldiers began to fall. Panic and fear spread through Reno's brigade as they realized they were outnumbered. Reno also panicked. He ordered his men to mount their horses, but then he ordered them to dismount and then to mount again. At last, he simply ordered everyone to retreat, and they all ran or rode away as fast as they could. They reached the top of the hill, but the Lakota were everywhere. That might have been the end of the Reno and all his men, except Captain Bennett's brigade happened to appear at just the right moment. Today, the hill is called Reno's Hill. Reno and Bennett stayed on that hill the rest of the day, all night and into the next day. All the while, they expected Custer and his men to ride to the rescue at any moment. Custer never made it across Little Bighorn River. He tried, but before he and his men were halfway across, all the rest of the warriors from that huge village came out to meet them. The only survivors of that fight, the only ones who lived to tell the story of Custer's last stand, were Native American warriors. Custer and every one of his men died that day. As to what exactly happened to Custer, there are different stories. Most seem to agree on a few details, though. The Lakota attacked Custer and his men as they crossed the river. Many of his men died there in the water. The rest probably broke into smaller groups of 20 or 30 men. Most of the fighting was over within a few minutes. Custer and some of his men probably made it to the top of a small hill. There they may have formed a circle and fought a little while longer before being totally overrun. After Custer was dead, all the warriors went back and attacked Reno and Benteen and their men. Sorry, I was looking at something. They fought all the rest of the day and into the night. The fighting began again the next morning, but the Lakota learned that more army soldiers were coming. Soon after, the Lakota broke camp and scattered across the plains once again, and the war continued. Sitting Bull's prediction was correct. Crazy Horse and the Lakota warriors did win a great victory that day. It was their last great victory. Less than a year later, in May of 1877, after many more battles, Crazy Horse and the last of his warriors finally surrendered to the Wasichu. As for Lieutenant Varnum, he remained in the cavalry for many years and continued to fight the few remaining Lakota and other people who dared to resist. In 1890, he won the nation's highest military award, the Medal of Honor, for his actions fighting the Sioux one last time near a place called Wounded Knee. So we will stop there today. Be sure when you are done reading, or if you've already read, to head over to Google Classroom and work on the assignment for Chapter 9. Have a great day. I hope to see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.